How's everyone doing today? Been a good day, long day, hopefully educational. So today I'm going to talk to you about a question that I've been pondering and thinking about for a really, really long time. And that question is, to what extent does the corruption of money lead to the corruption of our hearts, of our minds, and of human civilization itself? And one of the weirdest things that I've discovered going down the Bitcoin and the what is money rabbit hole over the past 6 years is that somehow humans seem to inherit the attributes of the monetary system that they participate in or play in. And it's been said that no man is better than his incentives, which may explain why the characters inside of a particular monetary game come to reflect the rules of that game. And so there's an old adage that says, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And my hypothesis is that maybe the inverse of that is also true. So if we play smarter games, we can win smart prizes, like perhaps uncorrupted hearts, uncorrupted minds, and uncorrupted civilizations. So this realization about the deep connection between human beings, between human corruption and between human corruption and the corruption of money gives me an ambivalent feeling, because when I look at the world today, it makes me quite pessimistic, right? We live in a world dominated by corrupt money. And I'll define this shortly. And as a result of that, it has led to a world filled with very duplicitous, shisty, scammy characters. And I think this is largely because the world is dominated by this corrupt monetary standard we call fiat currency. And in essence, central banks are these coordinated currency counterfeiting cartels that dominate all the other social institutions in the world by dominating the most important market in the world, which is the market for money itself. Now, this realization, again, about the connection between monetary and human corruption, although it gives me pessimism about the world as it is today, it simultaneously gives me an incredible amount of optimism, because we have now discovered, for the first time in human history, an incorruptible monetary paradigm. Something that humans have created that apparently us as humans cannot destroy, change, alter, corrupt, etc. And so, if corrupt money corrupts our hearts, our minds, and our societies, then it stands to reason that an incorruptible money could do the opposite, right? It could uncorrupt our hearts, our minds, and our societies. But to get into this, I want to define the word corruption. This is something that's thrown around a lot, and it has many meanings, which I think are very telling. So first of all, corruption, the way I like to define it, and then I'll get into the dictionary definition. Corruption is taking a publicly applied rule and bending, twisting, or breaking it for private gain. Now, when I go into the dictionary definition of corruption, I find entries like, corruption is defined as dishonest or fraudulent actions by those in power, typically bribery, which is money accepted in exchange for bending, twisting, or breaking a rule or rules. So the most common idea of corruption is your typical government bureaucrat. Someone's passing him money such that he overlooks an infraction on a rule, or maybe bribing a judge so you could create a specific outcome in a court of law, for instance. This idea of corruption is very typical, and it typically relates to a government official or someone in power. Now, another entry for the definition of corruption is as the process by which a word or expression is changed from its original state to one regarded as erroneous or debased. Interesting that we use the word debased there. Now, there's an extremely popular film right now called What is a Woman? And it's going through the past few years of this wokeism, post-pandemic insanity where we've started to fight over very basic definitions like what is a man, what is a woman. And I think it's at least worth pondering the connection between the corruption of money, like debasing currency, that is somehow connected to the debasement of actual definitions of words that we're using. Now, another definition of corruption is the process by which a computer database or program becomes debased by alteration or the introduction of errors. So you might use a very certain folder tree or taxonomy to make sure that data doesn't get corrupted, right? So whatever you're saving to your hard drive, you want to know that it comes back to you the way that it was saved. If for some reason there were errors in that data, you would say the data is corrupted. And now this is a useful lens too for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is this, we say Bitcoin's incorruptible money, but what are we saying? We're saying it's a database that's effectively unalterable unilaterally or arbitrarily, right? It's only alterable by the consent of the network constituents. And it's governed by rules that can only be altered by, again, the consent of constituents. Finally, last entry for the definition of corruption is a bit archaic, but also useful. Corruption is defined as a process of decay or putrefaction. So if I were in the 18th century, it may have sounded proper for me to say something like, the potato turned black and rotten with corruption. So I give you all those definitions because I think they're relevant to exploring this connection that we'll go into next. So in the West, there is this principle that we should each be equal in the eyes of the law, meaning that the law should be applied equally to all of us, regardless of who we are, who we know, how rich we are, etc. But in the real world, of course, corruption prevents us from all being equal in the eyes of the law, because in the real world, money is something like a meta law. And this is evidenced by the infamous Rothschild quote, "Give me the power to issue a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws." Or the other quote, right? "He who has the gold makes the rules." Whoever has the money, has the power, can sort of write their own rules. So it's a bit of a meta rule or a meta law. So it's no surprise that when money is corrupt, in the sense that its supply is easily and arbitrarily alterable, which is what we have with fiat currency, that our legal systems that are built on top of that monetary paradigm also become corrupt in the sense that they are arbitrarily alterable and not evenly applied. We are not equal in the eyes of the law under a fiat paradigm. And I think it's important for us to remember that the purpose of the law is exclusively to enshrine life, liberty, and property, right? This is the same philosophical scope of government. That's all it should do. Anything it does beyond that is going beyond the bounds of what good government should be. And as Bastiat wrote, life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. So, everyone being equal in the eyes of the law is this ideal underpinning the constitutional republic, which is the greatest governance system that human beings have yet developed. The United States was founded as a constitutional republic, and in that, the sovereignty of the individual is held to be higher than the sovereignty of the state, which makes the individual the cornerstone of a constitutional republic. And to describe what this is, like to form a constitution, what does that mean? We essentially sit down and write a list of rules on a sheet of paper. And once we've agreed to this rule set that will apply to everyone in the territory forever, you write the word Constitution on top to indicate that this set of rules is unalterable and will be evenly applicable to everyone. And then you convince everyone to abide by that set of rules. And so, writing Constitution, what does this do? It sort of indicates the foundational nature of these rules, and it also emphasizes the idea that they cannot be easily altered. They should only be altered through the consent of the constituents. Now, this, again, once we have these rules in place, obviously they're only as good as they are enacted. So that to the extent we follow these rules and don't alter them and don't break them is the effectiveness that they have. This has clearly been a problem throughout history because people write down rules and then they don't follow them. With Bitcoin, we have something a little bit different in that we finally have a set of rules that are self-contained and cannot be ignored, at least from an economic standpoint, in that it's sort of combined rules and incentives in a way, and incentivize the following of its rules. And so, in that sense, if a constitutional republic is one group of humans organized under this sheet of paper of unbreakable rules, we might say that Bitcoin is like the ultimate form of a constitutional republic. We can't break the rules even if we wanted to. Now, when it comes to money, and we're again talking about the corruption of money, and I'll go back to my first definition, this bending, twisting, or breaking of a publicly applied rule for private gain. What is the public rule of money? I would formulate it something like this. There is an expectation when you trade your labor or your goods for money that the purchasing power, which we could say the effort or the wealth, the sacrifice, I'll just call it purchasing power, that you put in to the money is at least what you're going to be able to take out of the money, right? Whatever value you put in, you expect to be able to take out. This is the store value function of money. So another way of saying that is money is like a way of accounting for the approximate value of services you've rendered to other humans and that you would expect those humans to render back to you for the money you have exchanged. So in a free market economy, as the scope of human trade tends to expand and productivity gains accrete to the savers of hard money in the form of purchasing power increases, this gives us a means not only of benefiting from the productive work of others, but also for others to benefit from the productive work of ourselves. And this is the fabric that holds us together, right? So we don't have to fight over every sandwich. We can instead engage in contract and trade. And so there's a great quote on this by Ayn Rand, who wrote, "To trade by means of money is the code of the men of goodwill. Money rests on the axiom that every man is the owner of his mind and his effort." Now, if the corruption of money is the bending, twisting, or breaking of this publicly applied rule, what would the corruption of money look like? Corrupt money would entail that the purchasing power you put in to obtain the money would be greater than what you would later take out, right? Your savings would be debased. Your effort would be stolen from you in some systematic way. Like, it's not something clearly we can control. So it's pretty clear, if you know anything about central banking, that this perfectly fits that definition, in that through the issuance of fiat currency, savers are debased, they are plundered, they are robbed, they are stolen from legally and in broad daylight. So, and this is done to enrich a small group of currency counterfeiters, which would be the shareholders of the central bank itself. And to capture this all in a popular quote that I've used many times is, inflation is legal counterfeiting, counterfeiting is criminal inflation. There is no economic difference between the two, only a legal one. Central banking is a legal monopoly, meaning that it is an unnatural institution that is unable to exist in a free market or a free world. In other words, for a central bank to be able to produce free money, which is effectively the profit it generates called seigniorage, that it constantly gets to produce profits for itself by producing money. to produce that free money requires an unfree population. And that's the world we're living in today. So central banking is nothing more than an institution of legal plunder. And to cite Bastiat again, how is legal plunder to be identified? Quite simply, see if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives to other persons whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing a crime. Now, if you can counterfeit currency without going to jail, then I would say the central bank was not an institution of legal plunder. But so far as I know, that is not a possibility. So, central banking, in my strong opinion, is unequivocally the corruption of money, and that it's bending this publicly applied rule for private gain. So this takes us back to our original question, the one that I've been pondering for a long time. To what extent does the corruption of money corrupt human hearts, human minds, and in aggregate human civilization? So, to explore the moral implications of these three dimensions, we'll focus first on the heart. And there's no better parable, in my estimation, than the parable of the winemaker, which I've shared. I got this from Gary North, who wrote a book called Honest Money, and it's in my piece, Masters and Slaves of Money. I'll try to keep it short. If you consider that a winemaker who traditionally sells his bottles of wine for $20 knows that the central bank just doubled the money supply to, quote unquote, save the economy, he's faced with three options. The winemaker can continue selling his wine for $20 and know that his profit margin will be reduced by 50% since the money supply was doubled. Second option is to water down his wine or use inferior ingredients and keep charging $20 for his wine but decrease his input cost. This is effectively defrauding your customers. You're going to keep selling them the same product at $20, but you've sold it with worse ingredients. Okay, that's the second option. Third option is the honest path. You would just double your price from $20 to $40, keep using the same ingredients, and your profit margin is intact. Now, if even an honest, let's just say the winemaker chooses the first option. He's eating that loss, right? 50%. So if he decides to water down his wine or use cheaper ingredients, again, he's defrauding his customer. So let's assume the guy is honest. He chooses the third option. He wants to double his prices. That is creating a direct inducement to all of his customers to look at his competitors and consider buying wine from them instead. Now, other competitors might not have such scruples. They might be a little bit dishonest. They might be willing to water down the wine just a little bit, maybe just a little bit where they can't tell or use just slightly cheaper grapes. And so when inflation strikes, it's creating this incentive trap where producers, in this case of wine, have to weigh their financial well-being, the maintenance of their profit margin, with their moral integrity. And they have to make a decision what they're going to do. And even if they choose the right path, they're often sending their customers into the arms of other producers that are less scrupulous. So, and in similar vein, this monetary inflation or counterfeiting does the same thing to producers across all industries. And this leads to weird phenomena, right? This is not just prices go up, quality go down. Sometimes both happen at the same time. You guys may have heard of shrinkflation. There's a lot of memes floating around on the internet that shows the size of a Snickers bar going down over time while its price goes up. So when we counterfeit currency, we're creating incentives that cause producers to defraud their customers and directly decrease the quality of goods and services. We're literally corrupting the very act of production itself through counterfeiting currency. Now, the obvious answer to this would be something like Bitcoin, which has a 0% terminal inflation rate, and you wouldn't have to deal with this uncertainty of currency counterfeiting. So, this idea of counterfeiting currency actually places the temptation of larceny or fraud on the heart of producers. to defraud their customers. This is one way that I think the parable of the winemaker, it explains how the corruption of money leads to the corruption of the human heart. Now, to look at the mind. Corrupt money corrupts the human mind by providing a source of funding for propaganda and psyops. As Napoleon once said, history is a set of lies that people have agreed upon. And somewhat ironically, the attribution of this particular quote is unsupported by any historical evidence whatsoever. We don't even know if Napoleon said that, but it's a pretty good quote. And there's this deep connection between the lies of history and the thefts of history. We might reflect on Nietzsche's infamous quote here that everything the state says is a lie and everything it has is stolen. And when I look backward across human history, I see many romantic lies told as a means of manipulating people's minds, typically to separate them from their stuff. In ancient Egypt, we had the pharaoh god kings that told the romantic lie of their own self-proclaimed divinity, where they were gods charged with domineering all of their human subjects. In Soviet Marxist Russia, the lie was from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And the theft was the total abolition of private property. And more recently, during the global pandemic, the romantic lie was nobody is safe until everybody is safe. And all, in which was of course used to cover up the global coordinated counterfeiting of currency by central banks everywhere to the tune of, I think, $20 trillion. Now, in all of these lies, there's a story of, we are all in this together. And it's spun to induce individuals to sacrifice their individual self-interest to the ephemeral collective interest or the greater good. And unsurprisingly, the desired sacrifice is always economic in nature. In the case of ancient Egypt, it was explicit slavery, right? There's a god king, you subjects go build my pyramid. In the case of Marxism, as I said earlier, is the abolition of private property, and in the case of the pandemic, it was lockdowns and central bank currency counterfeiting. Now, the next major lie we're currently dealing with, and we've been dealing with for some time, is this notion of climate change. And there's always some elements of truth to this. It doesn't mean that humans aren't changing the climate. Sure, we probably are. But notions like a Green New Deal that says we need to print close to $100 trillion over the next 50 years to quote-unquote fix the weather. If you're buying into that lie, you need to seriously evaluate how you take in information in the world. To quote Eric Weinstein, the idealism of every era is the cover story for its greatest thefts. Climate change is our current idealism. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe was the idealism of the past 3 years. And so I think the extent to which we can protect our property and purchasing power from theft is the same extent to which we can reduce the incentives for fabricating these complex lies to try and steal people's shit. You're actually just making it harder to steal people's stuff, which makes lying in this way less profitable. So, in this way, in that way, incorruptible money, perhaps, right, as being a damn near impossible way to steal purchasing power, could reduce the incentives for humans to try to run these psyops on each other time and time and time again. Maybe we can just break the cycle with something like Bitcoin. Okay, I'm running up on time here, but I'll try to make it short. Finally, corrupt money corrupts civilization by destroying its most important means of coordination at a distance. And that is the mechanism of price signals. Now, this is a complex topic, and I've actually never heard it put better than Saifedean in his book, The Bitcoin Standard. So what I would like to do is read an excerpt from that to try and explain the importance of this somewhat abstract concept called price signals. Saifedean writes, "In a free market economic system, prices are knowledge. and the signals that communicate information. Each individual decision maker is only able to carry out her decisions by examining the prices of the goods involved, which carry in them the distillation of all market conditions and realities into one actionable variable for that individual. In turn, each individual's decisions will in turn play a role in shaping the price. No central authority could ever internalize all the information that goes into forming a price or replace its function. To understand Hayek's point, picture the scenario of an earthquake badly damaging the infrastructure of a country that is the world's producer of a commodity, such as the 2010 earthquake in Chile, which is the world's largest producer of copper. As the earthquake hit a region with expensive copper mines, it caused damage to these mines and to the seaport from which they are exported. This meant a reduction in the supply of copper to the world markets and immediately resulted in a 6.2% rise in the price of copper. Anybody in the world involved in the copper market will be affected by this, but they do not need to know anything about the earthquake, Chile, and the conditions of the market in order to decide how to act. The rise in the price itself contains all the relevant information they need. Immediately, all the firms demanding copper now have an incentive to demand a smaller quantity, delay purchases that weren't immediately necessary, or find substitutes. On the other hand, the rising price of all firms that produce copper anywhere around the world have an incentive to produce more of it and capitalize on the price rise. With this simple increase in the price, everyone involved in the copper industry around the world now has an incentive to act in a way that alleviates the negative consequences of the earthquake. Other producers supply more while consumers demand less. As a result, the shortage caused by the earthquake is not as devastating as it could be, and the extra revenue from the rising prices can help the miners rebuild their infrastructure. Within a few days, the price was back to normal. As global markets have become more integrated and larger, such individual disruptions are becoming less impactful than ever, as market makers have the depth and liquidity to get around them quickly and with least disruption. I'll skip ahead a little bit here, but to understand the power of prices as a method of communicating knowledge, imagine the day before the earthquake, the entirety of the global copper industry stopped being a market institution and was instead given to be under the command of a specialized agency, meaning production is allocated without any recourse to prices. How would such an agency react to the earthquake? Of all the many copper producers worldwide, how would they decide which producers should increase the production and by how much? In a price system, each firm's management will look at the prices of copper and the prices of all inputs into its production and come up with an answer to the most efficient level of production. Many professionals work for decades at a firm to arrive at these answers with the help of prices, and they know their firm will be far more than central planners who cannot resort to prices at all. Further, how will planners decide on which consumers of copper should reduce their consumption and by how much, when there are no prices allowing these consumers to reveal their preferences? No matter how much objective data and knowledge the agency might collect, it can never know all the dispersed knowledge that bears on the decisions that each individual carries out and that includes their own preferences and valuations of objects. Prices then, and this is the key point, prices then are not simply a tool to allow capitalists to profit. They are in the information system of economic production, communicating knowledge across the world and coordinating the complex processes of production. Any economic system that tries to dispense with prices will cause the complete breakdown of economic activity and bring human society back to a primitive state. So money is the medium that lets us communicate these indispensable tools called price signals. It's how we propagate knowledge across the world. It's not just words, right? If words are the medium of exchange of human conception, ideas, money is the medium of exchange of human action, what we actually do. Okay, so I'm going over time here, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. In a very Darwinian sense, each of us is just a survival strategy propagating through blood, flesh, and bone. That's what your DNA is. It's a history of all the things that have worked across time to contribute to your survival. So it's little wonder that we become the games we play. We adapt to the rules of the games we play. And so when you look at it that way and you see that we have poured ourselves into this game of fiat currency that has really bad incentives, that it incentivizes people to hurt people, right? It incentivizes theft and deception and corruption, as we've described here. And the inverse would also be true, right? If we pour ourselves into a game that incentivizes people to help people, people to collaborate, a system with really strong private property rights, that we could uncorrupt our hearts and our minds and ultimately our civilization. And so the name of the game in the fiat paradigm, again, it's people hurting people. And the name of the game in Bitcoin is people helping people. It's a better game. And in this way, I think it's fair to say that incorruptible money helps to uncorrupt the soul of humanity, our hearts, our minds, our relationships, and saves us from the dark side of ourselves. To survive and thrive, we each need an uncorrupted heart, an uncorrupted mind, and uncorrupted relationships with one another. And in this way, I think Bitcoin is an evolutionary imperative as it moves humanity toward a more loving and away from a less loving world. And it does this by eliminating corruption from the game of money itself. And this is how and why I think Bitcoin prevents the rot of civilization. If you remember that last definition I gave of corruption early on, of the potato becoming black and rotten with corruption, we are rotting civilization with fiat currency. And we are rotting our hearts and our minds in the process. So what we need is a better game, and this is why Bitcoin is an absolute evolutionary imperative for the human race. Thank you for listening to me for 31 minutes. See you guys out there.